Hey guys, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and today I've got my full review of the Viper Fortis. Now this knife is a Vox collaboration, and there are a number of these out there. I think there's the Kiyomi and the Vox, and then there's some Boker stuff and CRKT stuff and Fox knives and a number of others. So Voxnez is pretty popular right now, and actually I haven't even mentioned his own collaboration with Yenzanzo, which is giant mouse knives. And in fact, you'll see a lot of similarities between this knife and some of the giant mouse knives, the GM1 and the GM2, which is actually launching later on today. Now, want to get into my interest in this knife, which is to say that other Vox designs, although I've really liked the look of them and I've liked the blade shape and I've even handled some of them and the action on them was really good, the thing that was missing for me was the size. Generally speaking, I like knives that are over 3.5 inches, and most of them were not quite there. So when Viper announced this one last year at SHOT Show, I was pretty excited, and in fact I have not been really disappointed. This has been a well done knife for me, and I've really enjoyed carrying it and using it and getting to know it a little bit so that I can share it with you guys as well. Now, size and weight on this, which is what we were kind of just talking about, is 8¼ inches overall. So right in that kind of perfect sweet spot for an EDC knife. 3.5-inch blade, 4¾ inch handle, and the thickness on this is 7/16, so it's under ½ an inch thick, which means it carries in pocket really well. Now this knife has no internal milling at all, and even without any milling, the weight on this is still 4.8 ounces. It would have been nice to see some milling, and you could probably shave off, you know, another few fractions of an ounce there and get this down to an even lighter weight. But at 4.8 ounces, I think it's sufficient. So very nice to carry. No complaint at all, except for, of course, lefties who don't have the option to move the pocket clip, or I guess those who prefer tip-down carry, which also you don't have that option. Now, moving on to the blade. So let's just say, you know, size and weight on this, before we move on from this, is very good. You know, it's right in that EDC sweet spot with a 3.5-inch blade and 8¼ inches overall. A lot of knives hit those numbers because those are very popular. That's a very popular size for a lot of people. Now, let's take a look at this blade. M390 Steel on this, which of course is very good. And I've got to say, I don't know, I asked this before and no one responded. I don't know of any knife in this price point that offers M390 Steel. So we may be looking right here at the most budget-friendly option if you really want to try out that very high-end steel, which does perform exceptionally well in terms of edge retention and corrosion resistance and toughness. It's really an excellent steel. M390 Steel, almost a full flat grind. You can see that there is a little bit of a flat here and then a swedge on top on this drop point blade. It's almost a modified clip point. As you can see, it's still rounded, but it almost could be a clip point, especially if you see this rounded portion here, if it just followed that swedge. So it kind of is, you know, it almost adopts the look of a clip point in a more drop point blade shape, which is kind of cool. Full flat grind, nice and thin behind the edge. I already mentioned the full flat grind, but I didn't mention it is nice and thin behind the edge. Sharpens up really well and takes a very keen edge. This is one of the sharper knives that I've had out of box. In fact, it cut me when I was using it when I first got it. It was razor sharp, and all I did was touch my finger, and then I kept catching it on things. I'm like, why is it catching? Well, it was because it had actually cut me, even though I literally just touched my skin. So it came really sharp, which is nice, although not the end of the world. I mean, most knives, you're gonna wanna sharpen them anyway, or you're gonna need to sharpen them fairly quickly anyway. So I don't make a big deal out of that, but this one stands out as being really sharp. Now, what else do I need to say about this blade before we move on? Oh, I should point out, I guess, that one of the things that this blade is doing a little bit differently, as Vox knives often do, is moving the belly forward and putting it, you know, very abruptly up here at the front. Now, that means this maybe isn't great for stabbing, not that it wouldn't do that, but it also makes it really handy for any kind of this kind of cutting task. You know, that belly is just going to do a lot of really nice slicing and really get through material well for you. And of course, the edge geometry on this is quite good, with it being reasonably thin behind the edge. So again, you combine all those features and you have a very, very useful, durable blade that's going to hold an edge like crazy. So on the blade, yeah, total win. Moving on now to lockup and deployment, as we always do. You can already see that it's a titanium frame lock. It is on bearings and it's nice and smooth. Whoops, I didn't mean to hit the table. Just wanted to kind of shake it closed for you. You can see this is very, very smooth, closes nicely. Those bearings function really well. But I did have to clean it up a little bit. When it first came, it was a little rough and it didn't feel as smooth. And in fact, it wouldn't even, you really had to give it some. Now I can't, you sort of really had to bear down on that flipper to get it to deploy. Now if I bear down on the flipper, it just deploys faster. But I did clean this up with a little bit of WD-40 and then oiled it after, and it was beautiful after that. I think probably just a little bit of dirt from the factory, and you could see some visible dirt coming out of that pivot. So once I got it cleaned up, it's been really, really nice. I've heard some others make that similar comment, and I don't know if I don't know if I shared that with any of them, but if not, if you've got this knife and it's not flipping really, really well, just clean it up a little bit. There's probably some dirt in those bearings, and that's a common thing with any bearing pivot knife. Think about what's going on in a factory, and the potential for a bunch of crap and dirt to get in there is pretty high. So a lot of bearing pivot knives you might have to clean up a little bit when you first get them. So now it flips really, really well. It flips, I wouldn't say it's snappy. The detent is sufficient to deploy the knife, but I would actually prefer a slightly firmer detent. Now, there is one issue with that, and the biggest thing about this, it's a fairly standard titanium frame lock flipper, very, very solid, deploys really well, drops closed under its own weight really well, but not so fast that it's going to cut your fingers off. But there is one issue that I have with lockup and deployment here. By the way, I don't know if I can do it with this hand. I can do it with this hand though. The thumb hold, the thumb hold does work for deployment if you want to open it slower. So again, that's really nice. Now the thing that I'm not totally crazy about is the way this flipper is designed. Notice that right where I want to put my finger to flip the knife is a point. Now, that just seems like it needs to be better. If I take some of the other flippers I've got here, notice how this one has that little bit of an angle cut on it right where I want to flip it. This is the Real Steel Megalodon. Okay, if I pull out, the Wii 601, again, right where my finger wants to go, they've flattened the flipper tab a little bit, and that's a pretty common practice. Now, I brought this one because I wanted to show you the closest other knife that I have with this problem is the 0452, and it's a little sharp as well. Now, it still flips well, and it's not a huge problem, especially if your fingers are as callous as mine are from flipping tons of knives on a regular basis. But this is actually even a little sharper than the 0452. So that's my biggest complaint about lockup and deployment on this. It's a nice solid lockup, it's a smooth action, but the flipper is a little bit sharp and the detent is a little bit soft. So, those two together make a fine combination because now you're not having to push so hard, but I would like a better designed flipper with a slightly firmer detent so the knife was just a little snappier on deployment. Now, let's move on to the rest of the knife, and that is the handle and the pocket clip. Handle is, of course, titanium. It is very nicely, we'll talk about this when we get to ergonomics. It is very nicely contoured and milled to be very, very fitting to the hand. Even though this is a fairly slim knife, under 1/2 inch thick, it's still quite comfortable. And let me show you here on the back of the blade. The blade is crowned, and it's also rounded here inside this small choil. That really is a nice touch. That gives you no sharp edges. It just feels like attention to detail was paid on this, so that you go, yeah, where's someone going to put their fingers? Let's make sure that those places are going to be comfortable for that purpose. Okay, and I do really appreciate that, and that sort of, you know, mentality goes throughout the knife. It's nice and smooth and comfortable inside the opening hole. Everything is rounded and contoured throughout. Just really, really thoughtful and really well done. So I've got to say, in terms of how it feels in hand, it is very comfortable. Even the backspacer here, it's got a little bit of jimping right where your thumb naturally wants to go if you're going to hold this in a reverse grip, so that's very well appreciated. Interesting how they have implemented this backspacer as kind of completing the handle. So notice there's the lanyard hole. The handle kind of stops here and then picks up again over here, and the backspacer sort of takes up that handle portion really, really nicely. Again, very nicely rounded, anodized with a blue on that to match the pocket clip. And so I've got to say, you know, in terms of just how it feels in hand and the overall impression that it gives of quality, that is really well done. The lanyard hole, of course, is also plenty big enough for pretty much anything you'd want to do. I don't know if you'd get, you know, if you tried to do sort of the double, you know, where you fold the cord over, push it through, and then kind of loop it back, that might not work, but pretty well anything else, and even that, if you fought with it a little, you'd probably get a folded over piece of paracord through there. Pocket clip, of course, is single position, and that's going to be, you know, a little off-putting for lefties or for people who prefer tip down carry rather than tip up, but for most people, you're going to find that pocket clip works really, really well. And this is another clip, you know I hate calling out the apostle on this all the time, but Rob is often making an issue out of milled clips. And I don't know, I've got a bunch of milled clips that seem to work just fine. So maybe it's just the knives we pick, or the experiences that we've had, or maybe he wears thicker pants than I do, I don't know. But I have no problem with milled clips, and especially this one is better than most. It goes in and out of pocket really, really nice, while still being able to retain all that you'd ever want it to. Let's get to some comparisons, starting with the Para 2. And the reason I'm bringing the Para 2 in here is just to kind of show you that this knife lands right in that sort of perfect EDC size for a lot of people. You know, this knife is wildly popular, and one of the things people point out about why they love it is because just the size is right at that sweet spot at 8 1/4 inches. And of course, the Fortis is just the same. Now, I've got a couple of knives that I want to mention as comparisons that I don't have here, okay? So one would be the other Vox collabs. If you really like this, but you think maybe it's too big for you, unlike myself, there are a bunch of collaborations with Boker and with Viper knives that maybe would be more suited to you. Another knife that I don't have here, but I think is worth mentioning is, we'll let this be sort of the space holder, but the ZT 0562 is almost exactly the same size as this, very similar materials. Not available in M390 anymore, but you might be able to find an M390 one out there. Anyway, this knife is, of course, much, much bigger, and someone who really likes this may not like this at all. Now, I really, really like both, but it is a reasonably budget-friendly titanium frame lock. So this, you know, the similarity, I guess, between these two is someone who likes really nice, well-built knives that are coming in at a reasonably affordable price. You know, you're probably going to appreciate that. I will say another very budget-friendly titanium frame lock is the Real Steel Megalodon. The Real Steel S571 Pro is another knife that I think is comparable. Both of these are fantastic, and I will say that one of the sort of improvements over the Vox would be the nearly perfect action. You know, the detent and the roller bearings on this knife are literally one of the best actions that I've felt. That's on this knife and on the S571. So, and again, they're fairly budget friendly. I think they'd come in about 180 bucks. And I don't know, I don't know if there's that many of the 571s out there, but I think there are still some Megalodons to be had. Let's see, what else have I got? Oh yeah. The W601, I thought that was worth bringing in here for someone who says, you know, I like tie frame locks and I like interesting knives, but I want something a little more flashy, and maybe I'm willing to spend more to get that. Another knife that I think is similar, more so because of the size. You know, notice you know, if you like those medium-sized high-end flippers, then the Spyderco Magnitude is going to be probably on your radar as well. So those are a number of comparisons for you. Not all of them I would say are perfect competitors, especially the 0452, but those are other knives you might be interested in if you like this one. Let's finally draw some conclusions here. You know, I think this is a really interesting design in terms of what Vox is offering. You know, if you like this size, it's either this or something from Giant Mouse. So you're kind of limited in that way. In terms of, you know, if we just look on paper at this knife, you have a titanium frame lock, really well made, anodized titanium backspacer and milled clip with M390 steel. You know, as soon as I hear all of that stuff, I go, yeah, this is a $250 to $300 knife. And so for this to be $189 at Blade HQ, that's a really, really good price for what you're getting. And you know, to me, as I've used this knife and kind of gone over it and carried it and played with it, I don't think you're having to sacrifice. Nothing comes out and says, yeah, you know, it costs less, but, right, it just costs less and you're getting a lot of really, really nice stuff. The finger choil could maybe be a little bit bigger, and the detent could be a little more, you know, dialed in. Not that it doesn't work. In fact, I've never had the knife fail on me ever since I cleaned it up. It did fail the first couple of times, but now I could probably get it to fail if I wanted to. But if I, you know, my measuring stick is, if I'm not really thinking about it and I just go to flip the knife open, does it open? And this one consistently does so. So I think this is a great knife, really cool design. And very, very appealing. And as I said, this may be the best price that you can get into that M390 Steel for. As stand to be corrected, as I said before, but to my knowledge, this is it. Hope you enjoyed the video. And yeah, I think this is a real win for Viper. If you're interested in this and thinking about buying it, I don't think you'll be disappointed. And if you are, my experience is that Viper has been fairly good in terms of warranty. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we will talk to you soon.